nobody buys the products from the firms I've worked at because they're good at moving data from one table to another. So it's almost that same rationale you'd use for build versus buy. If no one's buying you because you're so great at ETL, they're buying you for like the data output that you make. That's a buy decision. And I think in a similar way, that's an area where you should be comfortable with much greater levels of automation, where if you are building, and in many cases, like kind of these human in the loop tools, one of the reasons you're building them is because it's around your IP.
Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us here today. Just super excited to talk with you about just measuring the impact of AI and this most recent study that we were previously talking about that you were able to be a participant of, where you were measuring essentially ML algorithms and quant metrics being applied to certain high-level analysts and then not being applied to others, and doing that A/B, C, or A/B and probably even C or D testing, and the impact that had on what was the actual performance. I was curious if you'd be willing to kind of talk about that and what that would look like.
Yeah, so we had built a proprietary human in the loop application for these expert knowledge workers, and when I worked with some researchers at a mix of INSEAD, Harvard Business School, and Vanderbilt. Their names are Hyunjin Kim and Shi Kang, and they focus a lot of their research on the impact of AI, machine learning, and automation on knowledge workers, which can be really challenging to measure relative to industries like manufacturing.
Right.
And so we had set up this experiment with them as we built this new human loop machine learning platform to evaluate the outcomes for analysts based on what information was surfaced in the application, including machine learning predictions. And then, as you mentioned, we did go a little further than the A/B testing, and we added a C group, which had access to their Shapley values, which if you have not taken college math recently, Shapley values are kind of showing the attribution, like what data was contributing to the ML predictions that were surfaced, and kind of seeing what the outcomes were in the analyst or like expert knowledge worker decisions. And what we found actually was very interesting, which was that the analysts that I would say overall, no group had like a material impact in the outcome of the efficacy of their decision. So these experts ended up still deciding in a way that when we evaluated the performance, 3 months after, year after, you're still seeing excellent outcomes. However, based on analyst tenure, they were more or less likely to use some of the ML predictions to either focus on maybe more niche areas of their research, or to kind of speed up their process. So when we looked, they felt more confident in their decision, and we saw that confidence grow kind of almost linearly across that ABC spectrum. So the more information you had about the machine learning prediction, the more confident you felt about your decision, even if you weren't using the machine learning prediction as your outcome.
So agnostic of their use of the tool or this quant algorithm, right? Just understanding the algorithm in and of itself made them more confident in whatever decision they made, whether they used it or not.
That's right.
And so how much of that is just purely based off of it, like was there feedback from them as to why that was, or what was, because inherently I would think like, oh, they just are now able to say, I made this decision based off of these coefficients or these rationale, right? And so then therefore, when I understand this quantum or this algorithm and its corresponding prediction, right? But why it worked, right? Then I can lace that in and say, okay, like I'm accounting for this in this way, and I'm accounting for that in this way. Is that kind of?
I think that's right. One thing we found was that more tenured experts in their field, so not just like tenured at the company, but tenured in their field, did, they felt maybe more confident, but they didn't necessarily change anything else about their output. We have committees that review the decisions from these experts, and in those committees, what was interesting was lower tenured analysts, experts, had some erosion of maybe rationale. Like the committees that reviewed it actually found it a little less compelling for those that relied more heavily, who reported that they relied more heavily on the ML predictions. And so I think it's a great lesson as people are thinking about how to include machine learning predictions or AI in some of their knowledge worker decisions, to be looking at the ways to kind of preserve institutional knowledge and growth of your experts. So the concern there is if you have lesser tenured, green employees, experts relying very heavily, that perhaps they start to lose their own ability to think critically,
right,
and expand, or to even understand maybe the rationale that they should have been considering, because they almost felt limited maybe by what was presented. So important thing, I guess, to be measuring. And I think if you didn't have a system of measurement, actually, sometimes you don't notice how you can have kind of that erosion of institutional knowledge over time.
right. So just the sheer fact of like experience and grit of going through the practice, right, is still extremely valuable, essentially, is what you're saying. And if I'm hearing you correctly, that there needs to be, although we have access to some of these tools, there needs to be some sort of cadence that enables you to, and your team respectively, to have that experience, or go through the walk of the experience, to be able to have the knowledge to be able to know the pitfalls and shortcomings, right?
I think that's right. I think the other alternative is to start modifying our processes or systems or the expectations of certain roles. So I think as we saw with maybe more tenured analysts, where they use that opportunity, given all that information, to look at maybe more nuanced sections of their research, that could be an expanded opportunity for less tenured analysts. And so perhaps we need to start modifying the workflow, and adding these elements of like recommended avenues of research, or modifying how we develop talent, potentially, instead of just eliminating the machine learning prediction.
Right. So that kind of gets into like a very complex dynamics of change management, right? Like, and when I say change management, I don't mean like a deployment schedule for your technology. We're talking about human change management, and that within that dynamic, if I'm understanding, more tenured people are going to have that experience, and then therefore it's more of like training them that, hey, this algorithm is fulfilling what you're already trying to accomplish, and you become more efficient in doing so. But then conversely, if I'm hearing you correctly, like change management is bidirectional, right? So like there's almost got to be this assessment of where is an expert knowledge worker at? Are they heavily reliant on these tools, right? And these algorithms. And so then therefore we need to kind of like tailor their training to be more of like, okay, you still need to go through and understand exactly what and how these things are going on. And then conversely, so that inverse. Am I understanding that correctly? Like, what's your thoughts on this whole like change management as it relates to a study like this that kind of has a really good overlay? I mean, it was interestingly enough that the outcomes resulted in the same.
I think if you have strong governance around how kind of these expert decisions get made, that you can feel confident to be experimenting.
Right.
And I think that's why we felt confident in the study. The analysts did not know that maybe they were participating in ABC testing, so I don't know that they would have loved to know maybe the way that they were being studied. But I think that seeing the different attitudes is probably not that different attitudes toward even seeing machine learning predictions or potentially using them in their analysis is maybe a little reflective of different ages and generations in the workforce. The two areas of change management that I think can be challenging is one, the perception, I think, which is broadly shared around AI coming for people's jobs or machine learning coming for people's jobs. I think the way that we approached this, that I think, many firms, I would say, have had success with, is really that looking for the least interesting parts of people's jobs and finding ways that you can make those easier, automating those, to move them towards higher, marginal value activities, and presumably those are the ones that are very interesting. So, I think that message, and then kind of a proven path to show that you're working towards, like I said, automating the unglamorous parts of their work, is one aspect, and then the other, I think, is especially when you get kind of experts in their field, PhD level qualifications, I think that sometimes you can underestimate the devotion they have to their science or their art. And so I think one of the other concerns is always around like the erosion of the quality or the erosion of that science or art. And so I think using some the path for using emerging technologies to almost like magnify their expertise was another way that I think we had a lot of great success. So once we introduced some of the machine learning predictions, we were also using emerging technologies to capture, because on this platform we were capturing most of the expert knowledge worker activity, we could also see the person who makes excellent decisions that in a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year time period, show that maybe they're performing a little bit better than their peers. You can also go then and look at what's the analysis that they're doing, what data are they looking at, what's their almost like decision tree when they notice this anomalous behavior, and then codifying that as part of the workflow or part of the tools that are available. So I think one thing that really kind of earned their trust and maybe started to shift the attitudes in change management were also around kind of the goodwill in developing those analyses, which I think demonstrated kind of the same commitment to the quality and the reverence for the science that this group does.
So then how do you go about like measuring the impact of AI or ML in these different types of situations? So now, like, here I am at my organization and I'm trying to implement some sort of how can we take a framework of your study, right, and now apply it to your CDO or CDAO and say, okay, like we're trying to adjudicate our spend on these predictive models or on the use of these LLMs. What is some advice that you can provide on how you did your study in order to provide that discernible results of like, okay, we saw the value in the efficiency, and this is where we can get a return on investment because these expert knowledge workers are expensive. And so if we're able to improve efficiency that had the same outcome of results, right? Like, what are those things that you would probably recommend for somebody trying to measure the performance of their AI initiatives?
Yeah, well, I think it's great to start with even like your own product value. So in this case, the value is a little bit around efficiency, but I think it's mostly actually around quality for the business that we were looking at. And so I think one way you can think about that is having some type of either experimental environment or kind of governance safeguard to move forward if quality is your primary goal. I think most firms the majority, the easy ways to imagine use of AI and emerging technologies often really center around efficiency and productivity. So I think maybe sounds a little almost patronizing in how easy it is, but you need to think about what the existing benchmark is, and that goes for quality as well. So I think while it sounds straightforward, I think a lot of firms actually don't know what their current quality standard is, or if it's in kind of this decision, applied machine learning or AI decision making space, you're looking at how long does it usually take us to make this decision, both in, we'll call it human hours, and then also like pure life cycle. And so looking to actually codify your own benchmarks, and then figuring out the way that your systems can measure that change. One thing that can make some of these experiments challenging is also dependent on maybe your industry or the subject matter. You might not see the results play out for quite some time. So when I mentioned that we looked back at a 3-year, 1-year period, I think sometimes maybe, especially when people are trying to move fast with AI or emerging technology, maybe don't have the tolerance for those time periods. But I think that when you think very critically about how you built your benchmark, it does help you to create very specific success criteria for how you would know that something was successful. And I think if you are in kind of a regulated realm, or if you're concerned about quality, having that kind of governance in place, or maybe not using it in a production environment and more of a experimental scenario can help people get started to even imagine whether or not they're seeing the results that they'd like before they move forward.
So essentially, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's really making sure you define a process for measuring your quality, your throughput, so that way you can determine very succinctly and accurately your efficiency gains. So it's doing that the necessary data capturing of the efficacy or the efficiency or time synchronization of how long it takes to perform XYZ task, and then at what level of quality. Is that?
That's right.
So working very strongly with like your BI team and establishing those core KPIs.
And then thinking about how you might build them into whatever new system or the way that you plan to measure. Likewise, I think we had kind of touched on institutional knowledge before, but likewise, one of the maybe measures that doesn't present itself for a while is around what happens to knowledge management or institutional knowledge or expertise over time.
Right.
Because there are instances where you can over-automate. There's all kinds of examples. I think we've all read in books or in articles about, the proverbial pilot that, has never had to go off autopilot, and now in an emergency maybe doesn't have the skill we all would have expected. And I think I've seen in my own career instances where early in my career, one of the first human loop machine learning applications we created, I had over-automated and made opaque to the human supervision, or the human that was in the loop, certain aspects or attributes of the data that we just perceived as automation, but over time the humans understood less why those attributes were important to this kind of real world scenario. And we started to see like an erosion of quality, but it didn't show up for another 9 to 12 months. So it was hard to back into where that was coming from.
That's super fascinating. So this concept of over automation is super fascinating. I don't think I've talked to too many people about this, much less had people who've been able to quantify and be able to demonstrate the lack or the knowledge gap that occurred as a result of that. But how much of that is like any technology system, right? So I don't know if you've like gone through and you've tried to work with the business, right? And you're just like, and they're sitting there using, let's suppose, like a CRM or ERP system. They're like, I don't know, I just put this thing in there and then it fulfills my task so that way I can move on to XYZ portion of my job, right? Having no real understanding of what the ERP or the CRM is doing at that point. And so how much of that is like true, but now because you've created some sort of autonomous system, it's exemplified. Does that make sense?
I think the areas, this is probably gross oversimplification,
Okay.
but I think the areas where you can be more confident or comfortable with the possibility of over automation are really in areas where you're undifferentiated. So if you, I'm just going to like give a like classic data example. Nobody buys the products from the firms I've worked at because they're good at moving data from one table to another. So it's almost that same rationale you'd use for build versus buy. Like if no one's buying you because you're so great at ETL, they're buying you for like the data output that you make. That's a buy decision. And I think in a similar way, that's an area where you should be comfortable with much greater levels of automation. Where if you are building, and in many cases like kind of these human in the loop tools, one of the reasons you're building them is because it's around your IP. And so if you are building tools that's like surround your moat or your IP, then I think you need to really make sure you think about.
Yeah. So if we're keeping it in the same data paradigm, right? Like you're saying that a systemization and an automation of data pipelines, right, is less important as it would be for the person who's producing a core KPI to the organization and needing to understand the intrinsic values of how that corresponds and relates to the different market segments or the different customer profiles. Am I understanding that properly?
I think that's right. I just think like you need to think about where institutional knowledge would really matter and where, and from there be kind of looking for those opportunities to kind of have lost that moat when you're thinking about AI and machine learning.
Yeah, and this is super fascinating concept because I think all too often there's been, and rightfully so, like this like ROI review and analysis. Like there's everybody that's kind of like going crazy and just AI everything is going to solve all our problems because I used ChatGPT and it impressed me. And then like there's now like kind of like the pushback of like, hey, whoa, like we're just not going to throw the bank at this just because it's cool and flashy. And they're trying to like build these ROI analysis. And now like I think you're coming from an angle that I think is just super intriguing to me, where it's like, hey, they're going to create a knowledge gap within the organization by doing autonomous development, and therefore create a degradation in quality and operational efficacy within the organization. And that is something I don't think anybody is really talking about, which is super fascinating.
Well, if you think about in the immediate term, everyone is so concerned about a competitor or the proverbial, many enterprises so concerned about the startup from a garage
Right.
who can compete using AI and do things at a much larger scale. But I think that's where that's both the thing from the management perspective, that's soothing the experts, that like you appreciate and have reverence for their specific expertise, but it's also the aspect of the business that's keeping whatever they're doing from being truly commoditized. And so that's the area to really make sure you have, I don't know, that you're handling with kid gloves to make sure you're measuring, to make sure you have the value, whether that's efficiency, quality, and thinking about potentially use of this to expand your capabilities, but within that realm where you already have competitive advantage.
Right. This is so fascinating because this like adds a whole level of complexity on like project selection, right? Because now it's no longer just about ROI, because then it's like, okay, well, if we can increase top line revenue by X amount, and it's like, yeah, absolutely, let's go for it. We're gonna roll out this project, and but then if you step back, it's like it's a time bomb for you relative to your customer base, because the knowledge gap that's occurred could end up hurting you in the like 1, 2, 3 year timeline against your competitor who may not be using those tools. So if I'm hearing you correctly, like there might be like a contra or an anti-pattern that's essentially set up, where people rush to implement some sort of AI initiative, whether that be ML or language models or you name it, right? And so this is so fascinating to me. Like, I don't think that I've heard anyone talking about this concept of like this anti-pattern of creating knowledge gaps within the organization.
If you think it really applies, I focused a lot on expertise and IP creation, but if you think about it, it does touch touch a lot on overall workforce. If you think about your sales team,
Right.
and there's so many, I would say very straightforward AI implementations to enable your sales team that I would encourage organizations absolutely to do. Yeah, so Randy Pausch's, hypothesis, or the thing he would always say, is that people are very focused on technology problems and technology as a solution, but that most of the solutions are, like 80% of them, are related to actually how humans are interacting with technology. And so one of the things to keep in mind for your sales team, or if you're trying to build AI to enable your finance team, is what's actually really important for them to know to continue to improve systems, to be able to expand their capabilities in the future, and not just rely so heavily on these tools that their growth and truly like value to their organization gets more limited.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like such a fascinating notion, because I think, especially when you look at it like from a data quality perspective, I'm fully convinced that data quality issues are a byproduct of process problems, which ultimately are a process or are distilled down into people interacting with technology, and not realizing that when I don't put this in, or do put this in this way, that the person down the street, down the river, right, is going to end up like having to solve and deal with that problem, right? And so building these proper like processes in alignment with the technology that's being leveraged is usually what solves most data quality issues, not putting in governance policies that say, hey, like XYZ can't be done this way. It's like, well, they've been doing it for a reason. You just didn't understand why. And so, fascinating. So then this whole concept is very intriguing to me. And I just want to personally thank you for coming on and being able to just really open
Absolutely.
up, like, not only my eyes, but all the listeners. And I think that there's going to be a number of people that I'm going to be specifically reaching out to and saying, like, take a listen. This is a phenomenal concept to think through as you pattern out and build out your AI strategy and your deployment and your project selection, right? I think that this is a whole variable that has been so acutely missed. So, Cynthia, thank you so much. Really appreciate having you on.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.